it don't get everything is true, but what it don't...
Boss, you can't go on ignoring this rock and roll stuff anymore. Every hotel and club in the country's wiring for information.
Hello, Groove Dogs. Welcome to the Runaway Radio Rewind, a program that looks and listens back to the heyday of one of America's truly great radio stations, the legendary and late KLOL. It's the Runaway Radio Rewind. And now, here's your host, Steve Robinson.
Welcome. This is the place to find out all you want to know about one of the most successful rock radio stations in the country, Rock 101 KLOL. Now, sadly, it is no more, but the history lives on. It's the Runaway Radio Rewind. Today on the show, we'll hear from Brian Shannon, A.K.A. Eddie the Boner Sanchez from Stevens and Pruett fame. And speaking of S&P, we'll give you a classic Uncle Waldo bit, too. So kick back, relax. It's another Runaway Radio Rewind.
Kevin was there before we were there. Okay, so he worked with Lanny and Bobby Duncan on the Dawn Patrol show before we got there. Kevin was a transplant from Queens, New York, heart as big as, the city of Houston, and that Brooklyn, that New York accent there and all that. He drove a bread truck for Sunbeam. That's what he was doing, and he liked KLOL, and he liked the show and started hanging out, and he got, by osmosis, he got drawn in. Pat Fant, Doug Harris, who was our brilliant promotions director and all that, gave him a job in promotions, and brought him into the family. And pretty soon after that, he started doing his commentary. And before we got there, he would write it out and pre-record it because he was scared to death. And when we got there, we always wanted everything live because, as you very well know, there's that organic deal of, if you record it 2 or 3 times, you lose the spark. So we wanted him to do it live. And I remember the very first time, I don't have a piece of paper, but the very first time he was starting to do the commentary live, and we threw it to him, and we're like, hey, just you can, if you want to bring notes, but we want you to read it live on the air. So we do the intro, and here's Kevin and his theme music, and and he's like, he's got the piece of paper and he's reading it, and you can hear it about as much as him. And it took him a while to get used to it, but when he got back and got comfortable with it, it made 110% difference in how much funnier it was, how much more heartfelt it came across. And he was just as politically incorrect as we were. That Queens background, he told it like it was and all that stuff. And then he came up with the signature out on his own. I'm Kevin, and I just don't know anymore.
What was the most requested or talked about or questioned about bit on the show? Was it Uncle Waldo?
Uncle Waldo.
Yeah.
Uncle Waldo was the bit, and it was the perfect vehicle for radio. In radio, you want as much audience involvement as you can get. That's why we take phone calls. That's why we're always doing interviews. We're out anywhere, we're talking to the people. We want to get that interaction and that. So this is another way to do that. Uncle Waldo was, if you're not familiar with it, the whole bit was people would write in jokes in a script form with using our characters. Uncle Waldo and Big Bruno were the male characters, and Nymphia Scooter Pie and Queen Aretha were the female characters, and it was narrated by the real Herman Steele, who would set everything up, and we had theme music. And if you got your script read, during on the daily prize, you get a prize for that. And then of the 5 would be a script of the week prize, typically $101 or whatever. And I've still got a couple of them. Typical day prize would be like a coffee mug with the Runaway Radio on one side, and the other side it'd say Stevens and Pruett staff writer, and that's what you would get. And it was just the premier bit. It was audience involvement. We were scripted, but we still could jack with each other mercilessly during the trip down the joke, And then after the story was over, we would take critique phone calls from the audience. So we got more audience involvement, and of course they'd call up and bust their chops and and all that stuff. And And it's just one of the greatest bits, and that was all Mark and Jim's brainchild.
Everybody in? Girls?
Should we have a gang yank?
A gang yank? You ladies,
girl.
reach up there and grab that rope and yank the curtain. Come on, everybody. 1, 2, 3. Oh, yes, girl. Yes, beautiful.
Look at there, look at there.
Jeepers, you fine arts lovers wherever you are. Time to kick back and be thankful that it's another exciting Uncle Waldo adventure.
Will they be thankful in about 2 minutes?
As a matter of fact, they might be.
And that bit happened every day, right?
Every day.
Was there ever a day where there wasn't an Uncle Waldo?
No. The only time there wasn't I can't say that. There wasn't an Uncle Waldo if we were at the Grammys. There wasn't an Uncle Waldo if we were at the Montreal Comedy Festival. Right. We're out there and we're interviewing people and doing those. We didn't take and do the Uncle Waldos those weeks. But if we were in Houston, Texas, and in the studio doing a normal show, there was Uncle Waldo. And we did 3 of those originally. We did 620 was Buffalo Bob Speedway in his 3-legged coyote tripod, and he'd tell a joke in a story form about a celebrity. Right. Or whatever, a local celebrity. Then Uncle Waldo was at 720. Then their legendary bit that they brought with them from KALT days, Hudson and Harrigan days, a story guy would come in and did 820 and do the same thing, kind of like Buffalo Bob Speedway, where it was a joke and a bit, and it would be, telling a story about, the mayor, the police chief, the sheriff, and all that in joke form.
So it was probably no wonder that you started soliciting scripts from the public, because after a while you kind of run out of jokes.
Yes, yeah, and the same jokes would circle around, But that was our deal, as we try to freshen them up by messing with each other through it, adding different sound effects. I loved messing with them because I ran the board. All right, so I'm mixing the whole show. I'm putting in Mark and I are the sound effects guys. He's got 2 triple stack cart machines over there that he's throwing stuff in, and I've got the computer tabs with all of our stuff and carts. And little bitty stuff. It would drive Jimmy crazy. But like he'd be doing the real Herman Steele and doing the narration. We hear a knock at the door. Ding dong. Boner. Don't make me come over there. He'd be like, okay, they ring the doorbell. Yeah, he just throw his hands up. So any port in a storm to mess with each other.
That was probably what people liked best, actually, about the bit, right?
Yeah, because a lot of those jokes, I'm sure they probably heard them already. It was not the punchline; it was the journey.
Was there ever any friction between the members of the show that would be? Let me ask the question a little differently. Was there ever any friction that we might have noticed when we were listening that was not just irritation over the doorbell sound effect type stuff, but something that was real?
I don't think they ever put it on the air, but it's like anything else. I was with Mark and Jim for 20 years. They were together for 27 years. It's kind of like any married couple. Any family, there'd be some tension and stuff, but I can't remember a time that they ever like had it out on the air or any kind of indication. They were, and it was very rare that those occasions even occurred. Probably a handful in all that time, but yeah, I can't remember any time where it spilled over on air.
Describe the neighborhood that KLOL was in back in the day, and how that might have had some impact on the show.
The crime-free Montrose, where the circus never sleeps. Yeah, it was crazy. When I first moved here, everybody cruised up and down Lower Montrose on Friday and Saturday night. They just drive up and down real slow. People are gathered on each side of the street. It was where the urban animals hung out, which was this roller skating, not violent, but kind of a gang. It was a club, and they went everywhere on roller skates, and they were as eccentric looking and dressing as they could be. Of course, it was the largely gay area of town. So you had, the gay clubs, Mary's Biker Bar. You had also the craziest one that I saw when I first moved here, and I could not believe that it existed, was the Chicken Coop. And it was older men and then some of the younger teenage runaways that hung out down there. It was like, whoa. But it was very eclectic neighborhood, and we've jumped right into it. We used to have a bit that Mark's idea, and just given the weather and time and checks and all that, if it was 69 degrees outside, it would automatically start a Montrose parade. And we cut all these different, sound effects of a parade going by and chants and all that stuff. And we play that. It was like, ooga, ooga, sis, boom, ba. I like coffee. I like tea. I want Bruce to sit on me. Ooga. And it'd just play and trickle off. And there'd be people who call up on the request line and goes, "You sure it's not 69 in the Montrose?" Trying to get us to play those sound effects.
Excuse me. What question would you ask you if you were doing the interview?
What the hell were you thinking? God, would you, if you could you go back and do it all over again? Absolutely. Best time of my life, best time of my career. It was such a brotherhood. Like I said, we had our stuff and our friction, but we had each other's backs. And a lot of times, at times, especially in Dallas before we moved here toward the end, we had to have each other's backs just to go in there every day. It was just such a special thing. Mark and Jim, if you think about it, 80s and especially the 90s. The 90s was the era of the megalomaniac radio icons. Howard Stern, Man Cow, Grease Man. You've got all these big names, Bubba the Love Sponge. And if you go and you talk to some of the people that were, on the show like I was, but side players, they could be really egotistical and mean. And I had seen some of them at some of these Grammys broadcasts and Radio Music Award broadcasts. If somebody on the show said something that was funnier than what they said, they had hell to pay, and they'd rip them. And all that. Mark and Jim were so giving. They didn't care. They just wanted it, like I said earlier, you and your 5 guys sitting around busting each other's balls and having a good time and making each other laugh. They were very, very welcoming. They didn't care. And they would tell you, I don't care if Boner has the punchline, Lori has the punchline, anybody. What's going to happen is they're going to write down Stevens and Pruett in that ratings diary, and we're all going to get paid.
Talk to me about the feud with Moby.
It wasn't that we didn't like Moby, because we did not like Moby. Mark and Jim were big on a simple philosophy in radio from the Gordon McClendon days, 60s and 70s, and that's cross-promotion. We're on in the morning, he's on in the afternoon. Well, if he can talk smack about him to the point where everybody's going, oh, and then they get out of there and they turn off their car with 101 on, and they turn it on with Moby on because they left it on 101. What is he going to say about Mark and Jim? Because they said this morning. He really took it personal. And we even told him a couple times going, hey, but, I will say this. There was a little bit of a spark to it. We moved here in 86. Moby was still on at 97 Rock. And it wasn't long after we got here that he left to go the Eagle in Dallas. He replaced us after a little small interim show just completely bombed out from Sacramento that moved into our slot in Dallas. So he left. Well, Doug Harris and Pat Fant, general manager and promotions director, geniuses, had the great idea that we would throw Moby a going-away party and invite all of his 97 Rock fans to a KLOL event, and Moby is our guest of honor so they could tell him how much they appreciated him and his time in Houston. Well, he gets there, and he's a big old country boy from Tennessee, and all that, and by golly, and, and it starts off great. And then he, at the end of his little speech to all the people there, he ended it with, so I've got a contract for up there for the next 3 years, but when that's over, I'm coming right back down to Houston, and I'm going to kick their asses. And we're like, okay. So, lo and behold, when he came back and he couldn't kick our ass because he wasn't up against us, but in fact working with us, there was a little bit of that residual left over as well. So it was like, okay, all right. My favorite one, and it drove him nuts. We had a big cardboard cutout of him made for something at one of the promotions. Sorry. One of the promotions. And so we were doing a live broadcast from Memorial Park. In one of our contests, we hid that thing, and the whole contest was like a scavenger hunt. that we called Find the Hick in the Woods. And that was the one I think that pushed him over the edge. He was in Pat Fant's office pretty quick going, would you just call them off? I can't take it anymore. But we simply just wanted, the banter back and forth and the barbs so the audience would stay tuned in to see what each one was going to say.
What do you miss most?
Never laughed that much. Geez. Mark and Jim.
Yeah.
Kevin Dorsey. Chuck Schramek. They're all gone.
Yeah. It is pretty crazy. Why do you think, outside of just Mark and Jim, why do you think that radio station had an impact on people that was so much bigger than most other radio stations you can even think of?
We were street warriors. Even before we got there, it was the old on-the-street feuds that was 70s and 80s radio. 97 Rock's doing something, and we're jacking with them, and they're jacking with us. But we dug into the community. That's the best thing about radio is it's 24/7, your town, your people. Radio stations in that era were like pro sports teams. You were a Cowboys fan or you were a Redskins fan. You were an Oilers fan or you were a Steelers fan. And it was to that rivalry. Kilt was rock and roll, and KLOL was rock and roll early on, and Kilt went country. Then here comes 97 Rock, and it was just those feuds, but we just passionately tied in with the community and with the listeners. I remember growing up, I grew up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. That's why I met them at the Eagle. I was a KZEW fan. I was a zoo freak. And, Q102 was the other one. And I had a lot of, friends, they had Q102 stickers. I had that Zulu Elephant Zoo Freak sticker, and Fluid High and Labella and Rhodey were the reason I got into radio. Wow. So it was just the way that people connected with their stations then, with all the available media and, quite frankly, the shorter attention spans of listeners and content consumers nowadays. That element's just not there. But boy, back in the day it was.
I hope that we can do this again, because I'm sure I'll think of tons more questions to ask, and maybe you can think of some other great things to talk about. But before you go, could you give us an Eddie the Boner Sanchez? You're listening to the Runaway Radio Rewind.
Nobody ever wants Brian to do that.
Hey, what's up, Groove Dogs? This is Eddie the Boner Sanchez, and you are listening to the Runaway Radio Rewind.
The one and only Brian Shannon, A.K.A. Eddie the Boner Sanchez. Brian's a great guy. Very, very talented, too. Hey, if you haven't done so, check out RunawayRadioRewind.com. A lot to see and do there. Okay, it's that time again. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Uncle Waldo.
Sure, I can.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, here's Stevens and Pruett, the Radio Gods.
Here's Stevens for the Radio Gods.
Live from the cutting edge of contemporary entertainment.
Beyond the town of whoever names reading the junction traffic right now. Right?
From the top, Tommy. Tommy, listen to me now. Let's try it again. No cursing, okay? Okay, Tommy, live from the cutting edge of contemporary entertainment.
Live
from the cutting edge.
From the cutting edge of contemporary entertainment.
It's the Radio Gods.
The Radio Gods.
Stevens and Pruett. Say it.
Stevens and Pruett.
The Warrior Priests of Rock.
The Warrior Priests of Rock.
Always taking it out to that point where fear turns into fun.
Always taking it out to the point where it's freaks. Thinks it's freedom apart.
Tommy,
he's a wild baby.
And before you go to bed.
Wild baby, no.
Wait a minute, you can't say that on the air.
All right! Whoa, jeepers, you fine arts lovers wherever you are. Time to kick back and enjoy the legendary Stevens and Pruett, Not Ready for Drive Time Players, starring in Uncle Waldo, teenage mortician type person. This script was authored by Willard LaFanke. of Cleveland, Texas. Thank you, Willard LaFanky.
Wait a minute, spell that last
That's
name.
his name, LaFanky?
It's a French name.
I think it's LaFonk.
LaFonk?
Yeah, I think so.
Yourself, you fat but
LaFonk. LaFonk LaFanky is still the same translated.
All right, get
It's
on
still
with
the same thing.
Yeah.
Dumb fart. Yes. Yes. Act 1, Scene
Stop
1.
it now, stop it.
In Act
Whatever
1,
you're doing.
Scene 1, Nymphia Scooter Pie is making arrangements with Uncle Waldo for the recently deceased Big Bruno. Yes, let's listen in as Nymphia says...
Now, what I want you to do is follow these instructions explicitly.
Well, here at Uncle Waldo's...
Yes?
Excuse me,
At
one
Uncle
moment.
Waldo's
Excuse
funeral.
my assistant.
Yes,
Here at the funeral home, we always strive to please our customers. What are your instructions, madam?
Well, I want you to cut off his... and stick it up his...
Your instructions are somewhat
You heard me.
unusual, Miss Pie.
That's
Let me
exactly
get this
what-
straight.
Yes.
You want me to cut off his... and shove it up his...
Yes.
Damn near scared the hell out of the musician.
you have
Okay,
that?
I think we'll be able to cut off his... and shove it up his... If that's
better
what
do
you
it.
really want.
That's exactly what I want, or I'm not paying for the funeral. See you later.
Have a nice day.
Later, at Big Bruno's funeral, Nymphia Scooter Pie, wearing the black veil and the black dress and the black garter belt and the hose, passes by the coffin and notices a small tear in the corner of Big Bruno's eye. Nymphia Scooter Pie whispers ever so softly to Big.
I told you. I told you. I told you it hurt, you son of a bitch.
You've been listening to the Runaway Radio Rewind. Join us next week for more memories and goodness for the intelligentsia from the people who made the former KLOL what it was. Find us online at runawayradiorewind.com and be sure to grab your Runaway Radio gear. You can find the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Google Play. Show us your dog, and we'll see you next week on the Runaway Radio Rewind.